Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today it's already the night of October 7th to 8th, 2024. This is Leon Weinstein speaking, Los Angeles, California. You know, I have many friends and relatives who live in Israel and in Ukraine. And in both places, there are people who are terrified that Donald Trump will come to power. And they keep asking me what will happen to us. Mostly Ukrainians, more than Israelis, but Israelis too. Advertisement. Propaganda, persuasion in these countries by left-wing media outlets, and mostly people who attended, let's say, universities in Europe or America, in philology, humanities, and other departments. They are so brainwashed that it's almost impossible to talk to them. But the problem is that they are the very people who now bring these words to us. Words, so to speak, explain certain actions and so on. I would really like that. I'm not sure why it's taking so long. I keep overthinking how to do it faster, but I can't manage it. But to explain what will happen if Donald Trump comes to power, well, at least my family, many of my friends, and I really hope that's what will happen. What will happen specifically regarding these two countries where, as I already said, many friends, relatives, and just people I like live. So let's start a bit with Kamala from the other side to show the difference in approach. Then I'll move on to Trump and what will be done, not even according to my own thoughts, but in accordance with Trump's statements, with Trump's ideas, Trump's interviews and so on, and based, so to speak, on his first 4 years in the White House. So let's begin. Today, in an interview, Kamala Harris was asked whether Bibi Netanyahu is a friend and ally of the U.S. After a brief pause, she replied, "The people of Israel and the people of the U.S. are allies," which confirmed the Democratic Party's position that Bibi is unacceptable, uncontrollable, and acts based on the interests of his own country, that is Israel, not always taking into account the interests of his patrons, whom the Biden White House considers themselves to be for Israel. Kamala decided not to attend the joint session of Congress with Netanyahu. When he was reading, that is, delivering his speech, and then they asked him questions, she said that she had important interests. In other words, more important things to do. As it turned out, she was meeting with girls in a student dormitory where they were discussing women's rights issues. Kamala was supposed to preside over this meeting by position. She is the vice president and, as they say, the formal head of the Senate. When she met with Zelensky on September 26th, Kamala said that he was an outstanding leader, that she supported him in his just war, and her exact words were, "There are such people in our country," she told Zelensky. So, at the press conference, who will force Ukraine to give part of your territory to the enemy, who will demand that Ukraine remain neutral, not join NATO, and not sign mutual assistance agreements, so to speak, military and others, with other countries. These people, well, again, it's clear, so to speak, that this is a jab at Trump, are proposing exactly what Putin wants. Putin gives instructions, and these people just repeat them, essentially echoing his views. And let's be honest, she continued, this is not a proposal for peace, but a proposal for surrender, which is dangerous and cannot be accepted. And she added, Ukraine will win. At the same time, she raised, I think, her left hand in a fist up in the air. Before we move on to Trump, let's take a look at this beautifully sounding concept. So Ukraine will win. What does that mean? Several times Congress has asked, and journalists too, the Biden White House, specifically Kamala, specifically Biden, specifically Blinken, about that, and Sullivan, about what, in their view, victory means for the sake of which we are doing all of this. But judging by what she said, that some people are suggesting or will suggest giving part of Ukrainian land to the invader, it means, presumably, that she herself is not suggesting this. That is, she will not give up will not suggest that Ukraine give its land to the invader. And then she said that these people claim that Ukraine will not be allowed to join NATO, which means she will advocate for Ukraine to be accepted into NATO. But for that to happen, the Russians need to leave Ukraine voluntarily or be forced out by military means to completely clear it, including Crimea. And in no way, as they say, should there be threats or a state of war or anything like that, because the NATO charter says that a country at war with someone cannot be accepted. Kamala said that we will not give up a single inch of captured land. So we need, let's think together, to drive Russia out of Ukraine's territory so that we don't give up a single inch of captured land. The answer is simple, it's weapons. And accordingly, permission to use them. Because today, the weapons that are given either aren't long-range or their use is not permitted. What Biden and Harris have been giving Ukraine for 3 years helps the country resist the invaders, moving back and forth across Ukraine, destroying the country more and more and actually losing more and more of its population on the battlefield and under the bombings. Every day, Ukraine's population decreases. I'm not even talking about the people who are desperately fleeing abroad. So no one in the US or NATO is suggesting giving Ukraine long-range weapons in the quantities that Ukraine would need to win. That is, for almost 3 years, they have hardly given anything, and now they are not promising anything. And they say that Ukraine should not surrender, but should continue fighting until victory. But besides this, besides all that, the US, Biden, and Kamala Harris are also helping Russia. And Iran too, yes. By the way, to make money, huge amounts of money that these countries use for the war in Ukraine and in Israel. Before Biden and Harris came to the White House, there were demonstrations in Iran demanding to stop funding terrorism and to use the remaining money to solve the country's internal problems. And Russia was forced to use its gold reserves in order not to go bankrupt. Kamala did not say that she would increase oil and gas production in order to bleed Russia and Iran dry. She did not say that she would help fight against Russia and Iran to impose some additional sanctions that would seriously, so to speak, hit these two countries. They lifted the sanctions from Iran, just lifted them, yes. So, what sanctions did you impose or lift? Russia decided to build Nord Stream 2. A so-called miracle occurred and it was blown up. There you go. But she didn't say she would push on that. This is Iran, which supplies combat drones to Russia. In exchange, Russia enriches uranium for Iran. So by telling Zelensky, we're with you, but not saying how, like how the U.S. will help Ukraine win. And she doomed Ukraine to years of war, devastation, and the destruction of generations of citizens. A wonderful prospect for a country where the Democratic Party runs things as if it were their own backyard. But Zelensky doing everything he's told. I think he just has no choice. Although, so to speak, maybe he should have had a bit more guts. But okay, that's another story. So Kamala says she respects and loves him, and Bibi who says, I've listened to you, thank you very much. And now I will think about what is best to do for the safety of my country today and tomorrow. She doesn't like this person, doesn't want to be present at his speeches. She believes that he is not an ally of the United States of America, even though he was democratically elected. The leader of Israel. I understand that Zelensky is 100% dependent and Bibi is 50%. I don't know, I haven't calculated. Maybe 40%, maybe 48%, maybe 52%. But of course, there's a difference in their behavior. Of course, it's shocking. It's shocking, gentlemen. Right, well now to Trump. Trump, according to him, absolutely supports Israel. He repeated this several times. Absolutely. But at the same time, he says that Israel is losing the information battle, the war. I don't know if he's going to help or not. Kamala, Trump said, tried to persuade Israel to give Hamas a breather so that they could regroup and attack Jewish settlements again and again. Kamala constantly calls for the establishment of a Palestinian state, She says this knowing that, starting with Yasser Arafat, Arab leaders have refused. One after another, they refuse a separate state, and they call for the destruction of Israel by drowning 6 million Jews in human blood. Well, is that what they did? To seize territory along the border for 5 hours on October 7th, they slaughtered, killed, and burned alive everyone they didn't take captive as hostages. Trump believes that Israel should first be given the opportunity to clear Gaza and the West Bank of Hamas and other terrorists, and then give them, the Palestinians, a few years to live under Israel's military protectorate, and then slowly, if they learn to live as good neighbors, stop committing terrorist acts, and stop constantly calling for the extermination of all Jews. For the fight against Israel, stop teaching children to kill Jews. So then, if this happens, slowly start transferring to them the functions of protecting the population and later the borders as well, if at that time they still want to have borders. Trump believes that if shots are fired at Israel from a residential building, school, or mosque, Israel has the right to return fire at those locations. Trump not only recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel when he was president, but also moved the embassy there. He also recognized the Golan Heights as part of Israel and led to the signing of a cooperation agreement between Israel and 5 Muslim countries, the Abraham Accords, if you know. And he wanted to continue signing all the Saudi countries under this agreement. And Trump never called the Jewish settlements in Judea and Samaria illegal, which is what the government, so to speak, our current Biden-Harris administration constantly does. Even before his presidency, Trump was one of the 10 biggest donors to Israel in the world, and the only non-Jew in that top 10. What will Trump do when he comes to the White House? Sanctions on Iran. Full support for Israel in the war against Iran. The Biden administration also helped Israel with billions of dollars in weapons and brought the largest military group, so to speak, I don't know how else to call it, along with the Air Force to the conflict area for protection. Trump will use these forces for more active operations against the Houthis, against Iran, and most likely against anyone who tries to deliver weapons to Hamas and Hezbollah. And not a shred of ISIS remained. How long did it take Trump? 2 months? 3 months? Even though they said the war would drag on for decades. And now to the most difficult part. The most difficult part to understand is Trump's attitude and behavior toward Russia and Ukraine. I'm sure that after receiving a congratulatory call from Putin about his election, Trump will say, "Vladimir, we need to end the bloodshed in Ukraine. Order your people to stop and we'll gather all the parties to resolve the situation. But the blood must stop being shed and the bombs must stop falling." I think Putin will respond to this, agreeing to freeze the conflict, will negotiate. Based on all of Trump's statements, Ukraine will be invited to present a list of the necessary weapons. Trump will sign a lend-lease agreement with them, with Ukraine later returning either the weapons or their value. How they return it is another matter. At the negotiations, Trump will propose the following. Again, I'm basing this on all of his statements. Ukraine will not join NATO, which Ukraine has actually agreed to a long time ago, by the way. Ballistic missiles will not be deployed on Ukrainian territory. By the way, I want to remind you that Kennedy brought the world to the brink of nuclear war when Khrushchev tried to bring missiles to Cuba. Where? Trump will propose to change Ukraine's constitution from a unitary state to a federal one, like in the U.S., where regions like Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea would have a status similar to the states of the United States of America and would participate in governing the federal state. Ukraine was also ready for this before the war started, but the U.S., well, Biden and whoever else was involved, stopped the signing of the agreement. This is a note for those who think that organizing a country like the U.S. with 3 or 4 regions coming under Putin is terrible. Not even a single generation will pass. Ladies and gentlemen, before all these regions actively participate in Ukrainian life, not as satellites of Russia, but as administrative units of the federal state of Ukraine. At Trump's request, Russia will withdraw from the occupied territories in several stages, with the final stage taking place after the adoption of the new federal constitution. The biggest question will be who pays reparations for lives lost and for the reconstruction of the country. But I think this can be resolved somehow, so to speak. I don't know how they will do it. Several American financial conglomerates have already, in my opinion, bought up half of Ukraine's territory and will find a way to create infrastructure, industry, agriculture, and everything else. Besides that, investors from all over the world will rush to Ukraine, restoring the country and turning it into a single region comprising Ukraine, Poland, the Baltics, Slovenia, and Slovakia. That's 100 million people. 100 million educated people who are capable of learning. A new industrial center that will compete with Germany, France, and Northern Italy. This is one of the reasons why Germany, France, and Northern Italy, that is, United Europe, behave strangely towards Ukraine. They know exactly what will happen. In 10 years, this territory, which the Turks and the British will rush into, once again, so to speak, they have already given all the signals about this, will become the fastest growing region in the world, surpassing even the so-called three Asian tigers. The only thing needed is for Trump to win and enter the White House. Ladies and gentlemen, what I said is not my own speculation, but is based on the statements, interviews, and actions of all those participants, the key figures I mentioned to you today. Until next time, goodbye.